Hello and welcome to this edition of Talking Europe. Theatre is traced back to ancient Greece, Italy, the birthplace of opera. France was the first to hit the silver screen with the world's most visited museum, and indeed some of the oldest monuments across the EU. It has a rich culture, no matter how you define it. A rich resource, but today we're going to look at how it's being used. Is it being sufficiently protected, but at the same time also exploited? Should the EU be involved in financing or managing cultural sites or projects, or is that really a national issue? As the EU struggles for a common identity, can culture bring us closer together or pull us further apart? With me in studio, we have MEPs who are on the Culture Committee from Greece. Mr. Yorgos Grammatikakis, you're a Greek writer and physicist, turned politician, of course. You're with the Socialists and Democrats here in the EU Parliament. Beside you, I have from Ireland, Miss Leonie Riada. Your father, of course, a famous Irish composer, Sean O'Riada. You sit with the European United Left here in Parliament. And across at the other side of the table from Bulgaria, Mr. Svetoslav Malinov, you're with the European People's Party. And beside you, I have Frenchman Arthur Legal, a consultant with the think tank called KEA, which focuses really on culture. Particularly, Mr. Legal, you focus on policies both at the European and local level to see how they're implemented. Can you give me that global view overall? Are Europeans at a governmental level interested in culture? Is it high on our agenda?
I think it is, and it has become much more important over the years, ever since especially the 2007 Agenda for Culture, European Agenda for Culture. We are witnessing a shift where culture is now enshrined in EU policies from DG Education and Culture, but also mainstreamed. In terms of budget, of course, this is a bit more difficult, and we are seeing difficult negotiations, especially with member states when we had the adoption of the new Creative Europe programme.
Because, Mr. Grammatikakis, I believe Greece has one of the lowest in terms of public expenditure on culture in the country, and a country so steeped in culture, 0.2%, am I right?
That's true, and this is really a pity. But nevertheless, it's very important that during the crisis we have in Greece, which is very bad,
the refugee crisis, indeed,
culture still resists. There are many things happening by young people, sometimes without any support, and this is really great, which means that culture is in deep estimates of the Greek people.
It's alive and well. Ms. Nerea, how do you see it? I mean, Ireland really supports the arts quite substantially, does it not?
Well, we support it in theory. It's quite another thing to put your money where your mouth is, and we don't. Really, the arts in general have been decimated in Ireland in terms of funding. This is a huge mistake in my view, because we have such a wealth of homegrown talent. It needs to be nurtured. And we're known the world over for our culture, I suppose, from a literary perspective and from a musical perspective, right across the gamut. So it needs that kind of bottom-up approach with a lot more funding. But I think one of the big issues we have with funding, and this goes right across to the Creative Europe Fund, it's the accessibility, because there's too much bureaucracy, there's far too many application processes to go through before anybody can actually access it at the end of the day. And that's kind of a stopgap for people who really want to make a living out of this and generate employment.
Mr. Malinov?
Well, just to connect with that topic, I think that this requirement for co-financing by the state to some of the cultural projects is ridiculous. I understand the logic. If you build something that is going to be used by all society, or a railroad or a highway, of course, then it's normal to have co-financing by the state. But in terms of cultural project, literature, cinema, I think that the artists should be completely freed of their demand to guarantee some protection or some financing by the state. Because actually it makes it for the state. No. It makes it for for a Minister of Culture to have some additional expenditures. If there is a cultural project that has won, but they demand 20% co-financing by the state. That's what I'm talking about. I strongly against that. It's a very technical term, but I think everyone who's dealing with these problems will understand.
But do you think the state should subsidize culture in Bulgaria, or you think that that's up to the artists to make their own way in life?
Well, it is inevitable, I think, in every country in Europe. And I'm speaking following the figures. It should be subsidized. By the way, it's good to know that a lot of people are involved in the cultural sector, that it produces almost 5% of European GDP. So it is not something that we put money and we get nothing back in terms of finance. And of course, we have so many other things that are connected with culture, and it is worth paying for.
Ms. Nerida, in Ireland, there is a tax exemption for artists when they're starting out. What is it, up to 50,000 euros a year they can earn that are exempt from tax?
Yes, which I think is a very good idea because, again, it's about allowing them to have that space to develop as artists, which is really important.
But is it also a bit preferential treatment to other people that are struggling on lower incomes?
No, I don't think so, because I think we have to encourage and nurture the sector. Now, in terms of the criteria for that, I'm not sure what the cut-off point is, which I'm sure there is. I mean, it obviously shouldn't be a tax haven for the likes of Bono or other people who earn an absolute fortune.
Indeed, when you mention Bono there, you too, of course, came up for major criticism in Ireland because once the law changed in terms of what they could get exempted from tax, they moved a lot of their productions to the Netherlands to avoid taxes. You know, how do you see that, Mr. Matt? It seems like one EU member state competing against another.
Well, I think that there are some things that the state should protect, especially where we should use that language. Smaller states, smaller languages, they should be protected by the state. You cannot think in terms about profit about these things, and at the same time, I think that in many countries there is almost a national consensus that these industries or these sectors should be treated preferentially. For example, no one would argue in Bulgaria, with the exception of the finance minister, that there should be lower VAT, value-added tax, on Bulgarian books or Bulgarian cultural productions. And I think that's fair. The important thing is that there are some things that the nation states cannot manage. And here comes the European level of financing.
Indeed, you mentioned protecting language there. One thing I know, Ms. Nerida, you are passionate about the Irish language. I mean, at the EU level, we have 27 official languages. You know, how important is that, given that most Irish people, you know, all of us, can speak English as well? Does it not cost us to also translate things into Irish to keep that alive?
No, it doesn't. Because in the grand scheme of things, it really boils down to a couple of cents per person, and I think from a point of view of creating employment. But that's not really the main point. The main point is how we protect our identities and respect multiculturalism. And if we're going to be preferring one language over the other, you're not really affording the respect that each language respects and deserves and merits. And that's why I would always be very passionate about the Irish language. I should be able to speak my native tongue in every committee. I can speak it for 1 minute per month in Strasbourg, which is not acceptable. And so I would equally argue for any other language.
Mr. Grammatikakis, you agree?
Yes, I would agree very much because language is ourselves, in fact. We have to express ourselves in our own language. And I think one of the big achievements of the United Europe is that they keep at the moment, and I hope they will always keep, all languages in they are really lived.
Yeah, they're respected.
We speak in our language in the committees. It's very important that.
But there seems to be a little bit of a hierarchy, though, in languages as well. I guess maybe due to the amount of the population that speaks them.
You cannot avoid that. There's always.
But things like in France, I know that there's something like 40% of you know, everything that's broadcast on the radio has to be in the French language.
Usually, it's not only French language; it's usually European languages. As a matter of fact, it's often in French because it is included. I think it is also very important to consider what is behind this 40% share. It's also a kind of protectionist measure in a way, but protectionist against whom and against which type of works otherwise. And most of the time, it's not European works which are suffering from these types of
well, it's inevitable. There is no diversity without identity. And Europe, really, if we speak about European culture or European civilization, that's what it's famous for, with its diversity and its protection. Let me just tell you something really interesting. Before Bulgaria entered the European Union, we know we're quite late, like 60 years or 50 years late, there were fears that we will be culturally assimilated, our national identity will be destroyed, we will be forced to give up our national traditions, and so on and so on. So the anti-European propaganda was moving in that direction. What we discovered is that we have more money for culture, we have excellent cooperation within the region, and a lot of traditional Bulgarian, even historical sites, have been renovated and protected by European money.
Yeah.
So we are fine with that.
Identity, I guess,
that's
is
part
the
of the European cultural policy.
I would still say, however, though, that it's important for sovereign nations to retain their identity, and I commend the French for having that, 40% is in the French language, and I think that's really excellent. I think that the EU needs radical reform in terms of democratic accountability. So I wouldn't like to be presenting a picture that we're all united in harmony and everything is rosy in the garden. It's not. And the evidence is there when you see the fragmentation of Europe and the people that are so dissatisfied with it. So we're doing something wrong. And I think we need radical reform. But however, I really do like the idea that we respect each other's languages and each other's cultures.
And a lot of those cultural differences. Well, let's look briefly at something else that the French definitely want to protect. It's their cinema, their movie industry. Of course, it is the home, really, where the Lumiere brothers showed their first public movie back in 1895. However, this year there was some controversy at the annual film festival in Cannes. This was because 2 of the movies were made by Netflix, that American-owned organisation, and they were not shown in cinemas in France, contrary to the laws there. Let's take a look.
When it comes to watching films, the options for where to do it are limitless. On a plane, on your laptop, or even on your phone. But what about the old-fashioned way? That is, in a cinema.
My colleagues and I try to go to the cinema 2 or 3 times a month to see the new releases. Otherwise, I watch films on TV at home or on demand.
If it's a film with my children, I will go to the cinema because I want them to learn about the pleasure of seeing something on the big screen, the quality of the images, and the patience required to watch a film until the end.
When my friends say let's go to the movies, I say okay. Otherwise, I prefer to watch films on the sofa chilled out of my PJs. I can choose the film, stop in the middle, start again. She's not the only one. Home streaming services are increasingly popular, and now their products have hit the red carpet.
I took nature and science and I synthesized.
Bong Joon-ho's Okja is one of 2 features in competition at Cannes, funded by Netflix. The films have sparked controversy because they're not getting a theatrical release here in France.
Cannes will continue to program films that they believe to be the greatest films in the world. And those films may come to them differently than they used to. The audience is changing, therefore distribution changes.
Yet this goes against the French protocol, which says that films are released in cinemas first and only on streaming services 3 years later. Union representatives say they're prepared to compromise, but that cultural differences must be respected.
The audiovisual limitations here must change. We agree they should change, but they need to get around the table with us and discuss it. They can't be so obstinate about it. They can't take hostages like this. Netflix is the stowaway at this festival, and that's unacceptable for French cinema operators.
The feeling among many film industry insiders is that even if Netflix and its competitors produce high-quality productions, a laptop can never compete with the big screen experience. It's a strong and angry defence of cinema-going, which is what the Cannes Film Festival is all about.
Mr. Grammatikakis, can I get your reaction first and foremost to that? Do you think the French are right to protect their cinema industry, or are they simply outdated with the way people watch and things are distributed?
I think they are very right. And we have that problem in Greece also, and everywhere in Europe. We don't want to lose the classic somehow.
Why?
It's not difficult, because you see, it's even in the copyright discussion, which at this moment is very active in the European Union. We have to protect our own, say, cultural achievements. A simple way, very simple way, is that you can cooperate with other European, say, actors, and this is very often in Greece.
If we see them first, Mr. Legal, on a small computer screen rather than in a cinema, does it really make a difference?
I think it does, because cultural goods and services are essentially experience goods and services. So there is a strong difference between watching something at the cinema and watching something on your laptop. But in fact, the cinema going is stronger than ever. Surprisingly, the figures are going up since a couple of years now.
Mr. Malinov, I know Bulgaria actually, because a lot of people, the problem they had with Netflix is it was an American organisation, and it should have been a European one nearly highlighted in Cannes. In Bulgaria, we're seeing a lot of Americans come and make movies in Bulgaria, so that's a good thing rather than a bad thing,
well,
surely.
Of course, there is a lot of income because they come and they pay a lot. Of course, for them it's cheap, for us it's fine. At the same time, simply by having all this exchange, I think a little bit better Bulgarian movies are appearing and some TV series. So in a way, this is...
You're not worried about EU culture being overtaken?
I am worried, but not about Americans coming to Bulgaria's cinema facilities, that's fine. I'm worried about this kind of competition sometimes isn't fair. But in a way, that's why we have European Union, and that's why we have a European level of financing of European cultural projects. Yeah. So I can say that I'm not worried about French cinema, but about European cinema at all. But we have a network of European cinemas. They are financed. You can go and see movies, subtitled by small nations. If you're interested, you can't get that anywhere else but within this framework. So we have to continue to protect and finance these achievements.
Ms. Liueda?
No, I think, look, you know, we can't stop the times changing either. You know, new platforms are there and it'll be quite often dictated by the populations. And we've young, you know, a lot of young people who obviously hook into Netflix and they do provide a good service. However, I am very concerned, I suppose, with the copyright directive and how we're looking at that at the moment. And I'm concerned that these platforms like YouTube and Facebook and all of those, they are not paying because they use the opt-out clause of safe harbour, where they don't really pay the artists involved. So I think if that starts coming into it, we're in dicey water. So we need to protect certainly our cinemas, and we need to obviously protect the people that can use piracy when it goes on. Once it's on the laptop, you know, hackers can get in there, and so the artists are not really being paid at the end of the day. So we have to be very careful that we put very robust procedures in place that this shouldn't be allowed to happen.
And adapt our rules to that new distribution levels. Well, I'm sure there's more than enough work for you all in that cultural department. Thanks you all for joining me here on this edition of Talking Europe. Thanks also, of course, to you at home for having watched. That brings us to the end of this half. See you again.